welcome, Governor, and
Thank
thanks
you.
for agreeing to do that, to, to be with us today and to discuss your book. Um, we are delighted as Carib News to be able to host this morning's presentation, and we're calling it a community launch of your book. And in fact, it's a part of our Black History celebration because of the historic achievement and the nature of being the 55th governor of New York State and the first and only Black governor of this state so far. And so we're just delighted that we could get together to do that. The timing is appropriate. We need to be able to, from our own community, acknowledge and celebrate history and historic people in our presence. With respect to Carib News and the Black media, it's been the mission for the almost 200 years now for us to plea our own cause, to tell our own story, and to be able to inform our community and empower them. And your story is one that should be told, should be part of what we as a Black community, not only here in New York, but around the um, country and the world, study to get the significance as to how we assert ourselves and, in fact, accomplish in this society, much of which you have done. And so we consider it a pleasure, and not only a pleasure, but a duty to be able to participate in this kind of activities. And for Carib News, we're so delighted. It's our mission for about 40 years to be doing this. And we are also very happy to be able to partner with several folks on the line to make it happen. We want to um, certainly continue to do these kinds of outreach, and I'm sure today's program will add to our understanding of people. And for those who are being are involved, we certainly want to say thank you. You'll be interviewed with respect to the book itself by two outstanding scholars, Dr. Marcia Keyes, who is the former president of York College, founding member of Carib News, founding editor of Carib News, and certainly a member of the Carib News editorial board. She'll be joined by Dr. Basil Wilson, who is a former provost and senior vice president of John Jay College and has been a distinguished columnist for Carib News for decades and also on our editorial board. Governor, we know you were, the African saying is that it takes a village to raise a child, but it also takes a village to nurture a man. And your village has been Harlem, and we could not have this program without paying having Harlem involved and some of your colleagues. We are delighted that we have Dr. Lloyd Williams, who is here. Lloyd has been a good partner of Carib News and a number of its events through the years, also served to provide us with direction as to how the media needs to relate to the Black community and the broader issues. And we are delighted that Lloyd is here and serving as a partner in this effort. Lloyd will then introduce a colleague and good friend of yours and another outstanding historic Black figure in New York State, H. Carl McCall. And so we will then take it from there. And we'll then, after the session, we'll have question and answers. And there are several members other elected that wanted to be on the program. We couldn't accommodate all, but Honorable Keith Wright will be joining us towards the end of the program. So welcome, and let me now ask Dr. Williams to bring his remarks and introduce Honorable H. Carl McCall.
Good morning, everyone. I am honored to once again participate with Carib News on their events and programs. Shout out always to Faye Rodney and to Carl Rodney for their leadership across the city, and particularly in the Caribbean community, and the work that they're doing and continues to do is to be acknowledged and saluted. I am particularly pleased to be a part of this program because for the vast majority of my life, I've been associated with the Patterson family. David's father, Basil Patterson, a mentor and a teacher to me, as well as an advisor. David's mother, Portia Patterson, is very close to my wife, Valerie, and I. David's brother, Daniel Patterson, has always been someone who I've been able to reach out to and connect with. So my connection with the Patterson family goes back decades and has been a beautiful and educational relationship. We are very pleased, Valerie and I, to now have joined with Mary Patterson, David's wife. But I need to remind the governor that soon as the COVID crisis is over, Mary and Valerie and you and I have a delayed dinner that we wish and expect to have together. So Governor Patterson, give my warmest regards and that of Valerie to your beautiful wife, Mary. Let me move forward because I want to introduce the Chancellor Emeritus of the State University of New York, former New York State Controller, the only person of color ever to occupy that seat and control the many, many billions of dollars of the state pension fund, former U.S. ambassador, as well as a state senator. You should know that Carl McCall is at this moment working on his memoirs. Soon to be published, and I'm anxious to get copies of it, as I've done with Governor Patterson. But when history is written by New York State, one of the names that will be at the top of the list is my great friend and associate, the Honorable H. Carl McCall. Let me then, before I introduce him and let him speak, just remind everyone that if you have not yet had an opportunity to read Governor Patterson's book, Black, Blind, and in Charge, I only advise that you get it and read it. It is a walk through history in New York State. It gives you information on the challenges that David Patterson faced in his life and how he has overcome so magnificently. I have myself to date brought 22 copies for holiday gifts from Amazon for family and associates. So without further ado, it is my profound honor to introduce one of the most special persons in this country. Honored to have him as a friend and associate, the Honorable H. Carl McCall.
Lloyd, thank you very much. I really do appreciate your gracious introduction, and our friendship of many years is something that I really cherish. I want to thank the Rodneys and Carib News for making this possible. And I'm going to be brief because I think we want to hear from David Patterson. There's a lot of things that can be said about David in an introduction. We know about his illustrious career as an assistant district attorney, and then as a state senator. In fact, he served in the same Senate seat that I served in earlier. And then he went on to be the minority leader of the state Senate, and then eventually the governor of the state of New York. Let me just tell one story in introducing him. You know, New York was shocked when Eliot Spitzer, the governor, had to step down. This all happened very quickly, and all of a sudden, this fellow named David Paterson, who was the lieutenant governor, was going to become the governor. And, you know, lieutenant governors aren't that well known. And so there are a lot of people want to know, who was this David Paterson, this fellow who's going to take over as the governor? Who is he? Where did he come from? And, you know, he's Black and he's blind. I mean, you know, and some people even went so far, the critics in the media talked about him being the accidental governor. He became governor by accident. So the day came when David was going to be sworn in as governor. And the world was watching, particularly New York was so anxious to hear from this fellow. Who is he? What does he stand for? You know, what's he got to say to us? And so there was a lot of speculation about this, and a lot of concern about, well, how is David going to introduce himself? What is he going to say to us to tell us who he is? And so we had a big meeting. There was a meeting, of course, arranged in Albany in the state capitol, and there were many people there, and it was broadcast all over. And David was sworn in by Basil Patterson, his father. That was quite a momentous occasion. And then it was David's turn to speak. David came forward and everybody listened. What was David going to say? How was David going to establish himself? And David stood up and said, I am David Patterson, the governor of the state of New York. So he declared who he was and made no left any questions about the fact that this man, Black, blind, was going to be in charge. He was in fact going to be and was in fact the governor of the state of New York. So stop all the speculation about where he came from, who he is, what he's going to do. David said, I am the governor of the state of New York. And therefore it's my pleasure today to introduce David Patterson, the former governor of the state of New York.
Well, thank you, Carl. And I've got to say that I've never heard the history of that day, the compilation of it, and the emotion of it, and the anxiety of it articulated in the way that Carl just did. So just for a little history, had things been equal back in the day, the first mayor of the city of New York would have been David Dinkins, as it was, the first Black mayor of the city of New York. And the first Black governor of the state of New York would have been Carl McCall. But both Mr. Dinkins and Mr. McCall had the same problem. And it was a problem within the Democratic Party. Now, when David Dinkins was running for borough president of Manhattan, and he was clearly the person he'd run 2 times before, he had worked with all the people, he was the candidate, but he got a primary candidate and had to fight to become borough president. That normally wouldn't happen in the Democratic Party when someone had cleared the field the way David Dinkins did. Well, it happened again in 2002 when Carl McCall, who was the sitting controller of the state of New York for 7.5 years, decides he's running for mayor. And this is 2 years after the field was cleared so that Hillary Clinton could run for the United States Senate. But Carl didn't have the same opportunity to face off one-on-one against George Pataki. And therefore, he did not become governor. And I thought Pataki was weak in 2002 and Carl could have won. So I would summarize all of this by saying the worst thing that happened to Carl McCall is that he didn't become governor. The worst thing that happened to David Patterson is that he did become governor. So thank you all. It was very cathartic and really uplifting to actually write about all the things that happened at that particular time. I'm very glad that I didn't write it right after I came out of office, because I think I would have had some of the feelings that I'm sure that Carl had after 2002, and it would have come across maybe as a writing to settle scores or to call out all the people who mistreated you and that kind of thing. So I was actually glad that I waited for a period of time, and it was actually my wife Mary who talked me into writing the book back in 2016, and then we got started really more like in 2018. But I think that there are just a couple of issues that are set forth in that book that we see replicating in our history since the book has been published. And the first is the failure of this country to show any contrition, to undergo any penance for how they destroyed the people who lived here before they got here. Then they imported Africans to be enslaved in the worst slavery system that may have ever existed on the planet, because nowhere else did they separate families, regularly execute and commit violence against the slaves, and raped the women slaves to the point that they actually changed the identity of the race itself. And we see that accumulating here when people attacked the New York State Capitol on January 6th, as if they were taking what they said was their country back from because an election didn't go the way that they wanted it to go. And if you listen to the people who were challenging the votes of the election, what they said was, some of them didn't even really say that the election was stolen. They said that millions of people wonder about whether or not the election was fair. But although they had no evidence and no ability to change it, we should change the result because millions of people feel that way. Millions less than voted for the man who won the race, but still they thought just that bad feeling counted for something. Well, believe me, as African Americans, we've had millions of us complain about a lot of things that really did go on and never got a hearing. So to those who acted in the way they did between November 3rd, the election, and January 6th, all I can say to them is, how does it feel? If they really thought about it, they would learn what it was like to be Black. So it's in that sense that I wanted to write about the issues that occurred during that particular time, and really want to thank Carl Rodney and Dr. Lloyd Williams and Carl McCall. And also one other thing, the legendary group of leaders, Percy Sutton, Basil Patterson, David Dinkins, and Charlie Rangel, only Mr. Dinkins took the time to chronicle the events that went on during his life in a way that can be shared with our future generations. And so I'm so happy that in Carl's case, and in my case, and in a few other cases, that we've chosen to take that history and store it in documents so that people can observe it. Not just people of Harlem, but people all over the world. Harlem is probably the most famous place in the world, and more, Harlem looks like the world. We are Asian, Black, Hispanic, and white in Harlem now. We're upper middle class, but we also have people in social services. We're tenants, we're landlords, we're cooperators. We even have homeless people in Harlem. So it's a place that America always looked to for leadership, not just Black America, but America. And combined with the Upper West Side, I think a lot of the change that was made in this country that improved the quality of life for people came from our predecessors. And as much as we thank them, I think that Carl and I both tried to write specifically and talk about some of the situations that occurred during that time.
So thank you very much for that opening, Governor Patterson. This is Marcia Keys, and I'm going to be asking a couple of questions, then punting to Dr. Basil Wilson to ask some other questions, and then we may open up to the audience, and we want to have probably a lightning round at the end. But I just want to thank you very much. It's wonderful to see everybody here. Thank you very much for your service, your life service to New York, the state, certainly as governor and before. I remember it well as I was president at York, and I remember your coming to York a number of times. There was an effort on women and small business that you were very much leading. Access to capital for what? Yep, you.
That was the kickoff, Doctor. We kicked off the program in 2006, and if you don't mind, I'll tell you a little quick story.
Please do. That's a lead up. Go right ahead.
There were 5 different areas that Governor Spitzer put me in charge of. Now, when you're lieutenant governor, you're never in charge of anything. They just tell you that you are. But minority and women's business was the issue that I wanted Governor Spitzer to clear up in exchange for me running for lieutenant governor, because at that time I was about to become majority leader of the Senate, which had far more institutional power than lieutenant governor did. So we picked York College to kick off our effort for MWBE. There were 4 other areas I was put in charge of. In those 4 areas, the man who would become governor sat and listened to my comments. That was the one that he introduced me, said he had to go somewhere, and left, because that was the one that he really didn't want to work on, and didn't work on it for his first year in office. And I'm not trying to put him down. He did a lot of wonderful things for me, but he did not do that. And I was worrying about my accountability to the community of women and the community of Asians and Hispanics and African Americans, who thought I would even out the procurement of state contracts. And then the governor had to leave, which I think we all remember. And when he did, my first executive order was to investigate the contracting process and how banking, insurance, and the sales of securities were handled by New York State. And it was at your college that we started it all off.
Yep. Yes, well, thank you. These are some of the accomplishments. So I wanted to start with maybe 2 questions, a little bit more on the personal, political, if you will, and then I'm going to punt to Dr. Wilson to ask some further questions. We'll come back.
Dr. Keys, could I interrupt for a minute?
Of course. You want to welcome our Congress.
Our esteemed Congress member. He wanted to express his greetings, and I don't know how much time he has. So, Congress member, welcome, and we are happy you have decided to join us and pay tribute to our their historic figure there, Governor Patterson.
Well, thank you. I've been keenly listening in since it all started, and of course, you know, my grandfather used to say of people that knew a lot, that's the Bible. And so Governor Patterson is the Bible. You know, he's got the Old Testament and the New Testament, you know, down pack. So
I'm looking forward, Governor, to reading your book. I really am, because I know that you, you take the precaution and the care to sort of like keep track of what's happening around you, and you're a good timekeeper, right, if you may, of what's happening in the community. So I'm sure that in that book you have a host of events that are of importance, that are funny, that are sad, that are hopeful, and I think that that's why our community is made up of all those emotions, right? And so I look forward to reading it, and of course, hello to my good friends Lloyd Williams, H. Carl McCall, and the rest that are on this call, and the best for you and this book. And
Okay. Thank
by the
you.
way, great title. I think
Fabulous.
I think
Fabulous.
the only one that comes close to it is Black Robes, White Justice,
Yes.
right? But this is I mean, who will not pick up the book with that title, right?
Well, thank you, Congressman. When I'm sitting here and I heard a congressman was joining the event, I thought I was going to be the second person who left office that's being impeached.
Okay.
So thank you very much, Congressman, for that. And that sort of sets up my first question. I'm going to ask this question. So the genesis of the book, and you told me it took you some time, and that was good. And your title, Black, Blind, and in Charge. And as I first looked at it and read it, I thought, of course, yeah, he's in charge. He's local elected. He's a governor. But as I read it, Governor, I sensed that it was broader and deeper, applying both on a personal and a public level. Could you speak to your audience, please, about the title and its implications?
Well, I would love to say that I actually came up with the title, but actually it was my editor, Simon Mills. We were all at dinner one night and he said, "How about this title?" And everybody cracked up laughing. So we thought it was a joke, and then we realized it actually wouldn't be a bad title because it's very authentic. That's what actually happened. You wouldn't have heard anyone say that it was an accident that President Kennedy was killed and President Johnson came into office. That was the natural succession of the Constitution. Governor Rockefeller resigned and Malcolm Wilson became governor of New York. Every 2 or 3 years, there's a governor that leaves office and a lieutenant governor takes their place. But since I was the first Black lieutenant governor to ever become governor, so I didn't run for office as did Doug Wilder in Virginia and Deval Patrick in Massachusetts, there was this implication that there was something wrong with this because the American tradition is that African Americans have to work harder than everybody else. But in this case, all I basically had to do to become governor was to answer the phone. So I think that's where the accidental title came from. Like, how could this happen? It's one thing that these people are getting elected. This guy didn't even get elected and he's governor. And I think that was the attitude. And certainly the New York Post and even the New York Times wrote an article. And now when we start talking about fake news, the New York Times wrote an article that if I spent more than 180 days out of my apartment in Lenox Terrace, that they would take the apartment away from me. I'm spending it in public service. If I went to Iraq, they wouldn't take my apartment. And if I went to Afghanistan, they wouldn't take my apartment. And if I wasn't Black, they wouldn't bring the subject up at all. Mayor Koch kept his rent-controlled apartment the whole time he was mayor. 12 years, no one ever brought this up. So I think that the reason that I mentioned that is because being Black and also being blind, and for the blindness part, I made a statement at a press conference once. There hasn't been much activity down at Ground Zero, but don't worry, we'll be building at the World Trade Center site. The next day, they put a picture of some construction that had already begun and said, the New York Post wrote this, They should take Governor Patterson down so he can touch the structures, because he obviously can't see that we're already building at the World Trade Center. I mean, this type of litany of critiques and character assassination was actually what made me prouder of being Black and prouder of being blind, because at the level I was working, I could take it. But on the lower frequencies of society, people were being discriminated against and mistreated for the exact same reason.
Thank you, Governor. So I want to ask another question, and then I'm going to pass it on. So again, in an early part of the book, you tell a lot of stories, some great stories in this book. And early on, you talk a bit about the discrimination, the bullying, the awkward behavior, the disenfranchisement around being blind, especially in your education. And you also highlight the role of your mother. And I really wanted to ask you to talk a little bit more, if you can, about the role of your mother in your education and in helping to empower you to get your education.
You know, I'll tell you something that I don't know that I've ever mentioned it publicly before, and I don't even know that I've ever mentioned it to Lloyd or to Carl or Carl Rodney or Carl McCall. And it is that my mother took a medication a couple of days before my birth for a stomach ailment. And when I was born, I was not responding when they first, they kind of hit the baby to get the baby to start crying and that kind of thing. And somehow my mother seemed to feel that this medication she took had something to do with that, even though all the doctors assured her that the issues that caused my blindness had nothing to do with it. But, she just always had this feeling. And I think because of that, she felt that she had to lower the playing field for me, like 10 times more than perhaps another child that she might have had that just happened to have a disability. And so because of that, the New York City public school system in 1959 would not allow a blind student into the public schools. They recommended that I be sent to the Lavelle School for the Blind. So what my mother did is she went around to Westchester, and she looked even in Connecticut, and she went to Long Island, and she found a school district in Hempstead, Long Island, that's told her they'd assimilated blind children into the classroom with the sighted children, and that if she moved to Hempstead, they would accommodate her. Now, meanwhile, she was married to this gentleman named Basil Patterson, who's trying to start a political career in Harlem. And he kind of got moved to Hempstead with the rest of us. And so you can see who's running the show in that relationship. And Basil kept a residence in Harlem, and they put the name of the house in my mother's name. And just to give you an example of how politics was a little different, I think a lot of people knew that, but they also knew the reason why they did that. And as soon as I finished high school, we all came back to Harlem. But without that intervention by my mother, and I bring this up at public events, and if you're ever at a public event and you hear me bring it up and she's there, you'll notice that she doesn't really take credit for it. I think she's still got that little war going on in her head that maybe she did something to cause the problems I had. And that was not the case.
Thank you, Governor. Dr. Wilson?
Good afternoon, Governor.
Good afternoon, Doctor.
When you took office, your inauguration speech, you mentioned a number of initiatives that you intended to embark upon. But at the same time, when you took office, Wall Street had collapsed. How had the collapse of Wall Street impacted the kind of initiatives that you wanted to embark upon?
Oh, it destroyed them because we had a projection of a $5 billion budget deficit for 2009, 2010, after we passed the budget where we closed about $7 billion in 2008, which was 2 weeks after I got elected. But there was so many things that I wanted to do and to put money into. And, and I think those are the ideals of the Democratic Party. But I governed almost like a right-wing Republican because I knew that New York was not economically in the worst condition among the other states. California, Arizona, Illinois, these states were on the edge of default, and no state had defaulted since Arizona did in 1929. And I did not want to be the next state to do it, because then they would really be saying it was a super accidental governor. So what we had to do was to push the healthcare community, which is 45% of the budget, the education community, which is 21% of the budget, to take some massive hits, which they did. And but you're absolutely right. It impeded a lot of things that we wanted to do. We still got the MWBE program to work. We still raised the welfare allowance. We were the first government to raise it in 20 years. We still were able to pardon a number of people who were being deported by the federal government to stop the deportations for really rather minor offenses. And we were still able to change 200 years of debate as to whether or not a governor could appoint a lieutenant governor when we won that case in the Court of Appeals. But we certainly did not do, even half of what we intended to do. And I spent my whole life getting questions I could barely answer from people named Basil, and I see that it hasn't stopped yet.
Funny.
Also, Governor, one of the things that you point out in the book is that as you are about to assume the governorship, to move from the lieutenant governor to the governorship, you are bombarded with people who are in fact malicious, people who are seeking patronage. How did that change your concept of power and of the governmental process?
You know, when I was in junior high school, we would take a gym class, and they had those kind of bars that you'd walk across, and they were against the wall. So what we would do is we'd hang our clothing on the bars. And I was wrestling with this kid one time, and I pushed him into the bar, and apparently somebody had about, I guess they must have had about $10 or $15 worth of quarters in the pockets of their pants, and the quarters fell out of the pants and rolled all over the basketball court. And all the kids stopped playing basketball, were diving on the floor trying to take the quarters. And I thought that was the funniest thing I'd ever seen, but I would see it again. There was such an immediate transmission of power that I just feel that people who were totally sensible and totally normal and totally strong ethically just lost it. And in the book, I enumerated a few stories, but it was amazing to me, the things that people tried to do to take control and to obfuscate the process. And it really made me very anxious, because I got to the point where I didn't even trust my internal staff, because they were up to reassigning offices and you're trying to get rid of people. And the Spitzer people were still there. And one of the real bad consequences of that was that their idea of how to treat the legislature was to beat up on them. They were always playing to the front pages of the Post and the Daily News and the Times. And unfortunately, when I got the legislature, and they came kicking and screaming, but when I got them to come back in August to cut about $2 billion off the budget, because we realized that the state is going into a deep fiscal crisis, the speech they wrote for me and the speech I gave was kind of antagonistic. And looking back on it now, yeah, they argued and told me they didn't like coming back in August because that was vacation time, and they didn't like coming back in an election year, but they came back. So to have the attitude that I think I generated in that speech caused a lot of problems for me in the legislature. And if there's one thing, there are a few, but if there's one thing I could do over again, I would have done it the way Governor Cuomo did. He cursed them out in person, but when he spoke publicly, he said, "Oh, the legislature is so happy to come back, and we really are endeared to them, and that makes up for it." And that was a lesson I learned in government that I wish I'd learned before I became governor.
I mean, before you became governor, the media was on your lawn. They were all, I mean, in fact, bombarding you with questions. How did you think that the media treated you while you were the governor of New York?
Badly, badly.
As if my name was Rasputin. You know, it was incredible, the information they would come up with. My daughter was applying for a job at BET, and BET was having a big event one night. So I took her to the event to meet people from BET because they said they would interview her. And then I read in the newspaper that I took my 16-year-old daughter out to a discotheque. In fact, my daughter was 22 years old, and it was a BET event that they never mentioned. So it was, you know, this constant spinning and slandering and, you know, these stories that they ginned up from time to time. They said a state trooper caught me in the executive mansion with a woman. The state troopers never come in the executive mansion. So, you know, they're easily dismissed. But what happens when the media does that? It's like when you're shaving and you keep nicking yourself. Eventually, the number of accusations cause one to believe, well, there must be something there. They accused him of all these different things. And I'm not saying that there weren't some things that I did wrong, but what I am saying is that the antagonism seemed very inappropriate. And even some of the media people who were involved have spoken to me since I left office and said, you know, I didn't want to do some of these things. I was being pushed to do it by my editors.
So may I just find out how much more time do we actually have from Carib News? Because this was meant to be an hour. We're getting close, but we want to continue if we can. And we want to invite maybe a question or two from the audience. But we do need to have a sense as to how much more time we have.
Yes,
Carl.
Yeah, we have about 10 minutes more of your question and answer. And then we had promised to have another 10, 15 minutes for the audience.
And I'm
okay, very good.
I'm fine on time.
Yeah,
okay,
and then the governor would wrap up. But
okay,
so we can go ahead.
I'll ask another one or two, and then we'll open it up for the audience, because I see there's some audience questions already. So
Right,
I want to.
Marcia, just to follow up on the governor's point on the
Yes.
MWBE program. On
Yes.
MWBE program, Governor, just give us, I know the program expanded considerably and it brought a new awareness to this particular group. And since then it has been served as a kind of measuring stick for other governors. Could you really just elaborate a bit on your achievement in that area? I think it's very important.
You know, I'd love to tell you about my achievements in that area as governor, Carl, but really most of the work I did on MWBE was as a state senator and working with people like Lloyd Douglas and Jim Halliger from Queens and you know, some of the people who were really involved in MWBE. And oddly enough, it was Pat Foy, when I was lieutenant governor, who at the time was the head of the Empire State Development Corporation. And I said to him, you know, why don't these, you know, legislators who like MWBE, why don't they fight harder? And he said, because most of the legislators that fight for MWBE are business owners and they don't want their names crossed off the list. So it's going to have to be someone like you who really, you know, doesn't have a personal business interest who's going to have to lead this fight. And I thought it was interesting that a non-minority really gave me the encouragement to really make it a major issue. And it was a condition I set with Spitzer that he had to do it to run for lieutenant governor. Now, once I became governor, I learned something that Mayor Maynard Jackson taught me years ago. I only met him one time, but I sat next to him at a wedding, and then I sat next to him at the reception. So I got to talk to him for 3 or 4 hours. And he told me this story about how he wanted to have a Black architect build the Atlanta airport. He thought it'd be symbolically a great thing for the people of Atlanta to see. So he asked his assistants to find one. They came back and told them that they couldn't find one. So he told them they had 2 weeks to find one, or he'd get rid of all of them and find somebody who could find a Black architect. And suddenly they found a Black architect from Portland, Oregon, and he laid the foundation to build the Atlanta airport. So when I was meeting with the staff, all of which I had not put together, right before I'm being sworn in, I said to them, listen, I know everybody's all nervous about me making changes, but doesn't necessarily have to be any changes. Are we all upholding the Constitution? They said yes. I said, are we all upholding the Constitution of the state of New York? We said yes. I said, by the way, whatever happened to my MWBE program that Governor Spitzer promised he was going to do? I heard they called people before I could be sworn in to start making it happen. So strong leadership from the executive levels. Within no time, what we learned is that it wasn't even as much racial or anti-woman. It was that they just kept spitting out contracts back to people who'd been on the state payroll for 40 years, getting procurement, getting all these opportunities. Sometimes the people died, their kids were running the company, they weren't even doing that work anymore, but they were still getting checks from the state. Once we cleaned that up, there was plenty of room for women and minority-owned businesses.
Thank you.
Okay, so Governor, I'd like to ask a question related to a chapter in the book in which you, I think it's the one that says now about this slavery. It's just fascinating. I mean, really, it's personal, it's professional, it's researched. I tell you, everyone, get this book, read it with your family. Bring the young people to the table as you read it. And as I read it, and of course, you reference again the Martin Luther King Arc of Freedom in that chapter. And as you think about that chapter today and where we are, where do you see what you've said here being how can you amplify that concept of that arc of justice as we sit here today post January 6th?
Martin Luther King talked about the arc of justice, but he, in a later speech, made a little bit of an amendment to it, and I'd like to share it with you now.
Mm-hmm.
Apparently, he was in New York. And Doctor, thank you for bringing this up because I was told by the publishers that nobody reads books anymore. So the only thing you can do is, to basically give us all the dirt and we'll put it in there. And I stopped halfway through the book and wrote 2 chapters, one on slavery and one on what I called the forgotten holiday, which is how Memorial Day really was invented. And Dr. King was once in New York. He had spoken somewhere, and he and his caravan were going up to New England, and they kind of realized they were on the Merritt Parkway somewhere in Westchester. They're going the wrong way. And so what he did was they saw a police car, and they waved him over, and they got on the side of the road, and they told the policeman they're trying to get to New England. And the policeman said to them, you're going to have to go back before you can go forward. And so Dr. King, who could take an idle statement by a helpful police officer and turn it into a speech, gets to Boston and he says, if we're ever going to have true equality in this country, we're going to have to go back before we go forward. And that was where I came up with the idea that as a country, we really need to go back, as Nelson Mandela did when he became president of South Africa, and 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 get rid of this rage and bring it to the point of reconciliation, where African Americans get to tell their story to people who really think that everybody who's African American has an advantage in this country. And we're going to have to go back to discuss how slavery existed for 244 years. And the religious leaders of our country said that Jesus condoned it. And all of the mistruths and half-truths and straight up misrepresentation of history. There are 12 states in the state of Texas who are using a textbook that says that this is how we built America, and some Africans were recruited to come over to help on the plantations with chores. Chores? Also, in the state of Louisiana, they describe slavery in all of their history books. They describe the Civil War, I'm sorry, as a feud between the North and South over states' rights. Unbelievable. By the way, Louisiana was, the state of Texas was the state that sued the state of Pennsylvania just after the election to say that they didn't count the votes right in their state. So what happened to states' rights all of a sudden? So this idea of being right and wrong at the same time is what I think Dr. King was so effective at exposing. And he did it in a way where even people who didn't like what he was saying had to shake his hand when he was finished, because he was well researched, he was well advised, and he was, I think, one of the greatest speakers and maybe one of the greatest poets of our time. You never think of him as a poet. Read his speeches. They're almost all written in iambic pentameter.
Thank you. Thank you. I see, Mr. Rodney, I don't know. I see that Honorable Keith Wright is here.
Yes, yes.
I want to get him to, so I'm going to put the mic to you.
Please put my brother on.
Sure. Well, this was supposed to be Dr. Williams' task, but he's probably taking a call. But we have the Honorable Keith Wright, is the chair of the New York Democratic County body, a previous assemblyman, the son of Bruce Wright, a leader within the Harlem community, certainly a colleague of Governor Patterson, but also a great friend of Carib News, and has attended several of our editorial board meetings. So Honorable Keith Wright, welcome. And we were expecting you at the top of the show. We understood what happened, so we're happy that you could join us, and we'd welcome you to bring remarks.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Rodney, and please excuse my lateness. I actually am a part of an organization that is promoting Black and Irish relations. My father used to always tell me that his mother was Irish, and I remember she had a Irish brogue, a bit of an Irish brogue, and so I've been part of this organization, and they had their Black History Month celebration when they were honoring Frederick Douglass's sojourn and trip to Ireland. So, and I see David Patterson laughing now, and certainly he has been my brother, both legislatively and personally. Throughout many years, we've indulged in many wars together. Sometimes we win, and sometimes we don't win. But as far as we're concerned, we do always win. So I'm glad to be a part of his book launch. I want to thank Carib News for hosting this. And let's not forget that it's a book launch. We have to buy books.
That's right.
We have to buy books.
There it
And
is.
I see the most honorable Carl McCall, who's been one of my mentors and role models for many, many, many years. And I know he's got a book coming out at some point. I can't wait to read Carl's. But when David's book came out, I immediately bought 10 copies of it. I bought 10 copies. My son taught me how to do it on Amazon, and it was delivered, I guess, in like 2 or 3 days. And I gave him out as Christmas presents. David
Nice.
actually signed a bunch of books in my car, and I think it was I don't know, about 15 degrees when he signed them. But he actually signed the book, so I'm glad. And to be a part of, my son actually is reading the book now. He goes to work on the bus. So thank you, David, for writing this book. And I can't feel but to be a bit of a part of the history that you wrote about, because we were kind of right next to each other. I was in the legislature and you were the governor, and so and of course we indulged in many legislative activities together. We sponsored bills together and such. And so I just want to say thank you for writing the book, man. And if you want me to buy any more copies, you'll have to up my credit limit with American Express.
Well, let me tell you, he's not only, I think he bought more than 10 books, but what he also did is he told Reverend Sharpton how many books he had bought, and Reverend Sharpton got jealous and then bought 100 books. So he sold 100 books for
That's
me.
great. Yeah.
Because trying to get a quarter out of Sharpton's kind of hard.
Okay, thank you. So any questions from the audience? We might be able to take one or two, Carl, am I right?
You're right, you're correct.
Yeah, if you have it, you might put it in the chat, I don't know. I see a comment though from someone that says Governor Patterson does not get the recognition he deserved for the diversity that he brought to the judiciary during his time in office. This is from Sylvia Hines Raddick. So and he certainly made the appellate court reflect the state of New York. So Governor, do you want to comment on that at all?
Well, that was one of the real unfortunate situations that when Mayor Dinkins was mayor, he did that. And my father was his liaison in diversifying the courts. But for some reason, Mayor Dinkins did not want the public to know it. He did not want the community of New York to think that he was just there to help African Americans. Now, I felt differently. I thought that everybody needed to know about the qualified African Americans, and I appointed about 6 of them in my first week just to drive that point home. This is how you get called the accidental governor, by the way. And the judiciary and Judge Judith Kaye and then Judge Jonathan Littman had an event right when I was leaving office where I don't think I've ever felt so great, where they brought all of the appointees together and all of the other judges, that non-African judges and non-Hispanic judges together to celebrate that. And I don't think I was ever more touched when I was governor by that event that they held for me.
So we still have some time, and I don't see any questions in the chat. So I'm going to suggest.
Could I interject?
Yes, please
Governor,
go. Yes.
In the introduction of the book, you speak glowingly about this relationship with Muhammad Ali and your fascination with boxing. I think the audience would love to hear about that aspect of you.
Great.
So for those of you who didn't read it, back in 1986, I've been in office for 3 months, and I was elected so quickly. It all happened so quickly, the same way I became governor, that I think I felt like a spectator more than an elected official. And I go to this event and I meet Queen Mother Moore there. I had met her before, but she's there, and Lambe Brath and Sonny Carson and all these people. It's an anti-apartheid march, and we're going to Central Park, and we're standing around, and there was a buzz in the crowd that somebody famous was coming to the march, and we thought it was Arthur Ashe because he did a lot of things with Mayor Dinkins. So Muhammad Ali comes in, and he's standing with Mayor Dinkins and Arthur Ashe and the borough president of Manhattan, who was Ruth Messenger, and they're standing there. And Bill, I think it was Bill Lynch, says to Muhammad Ali, come meet the newest senator, and he's one of the youngest senators that's ever been elected. So Muhammad Ali comes over and he says, hi, and he shakes my hand, but I don't know who he is. So I just shake his hand and say, nice to meet you. You know, I walk past him. So Muhammad Ali turns and he looks at the people and he says, well, now I can see why these elected officials are so out of touch. This guy over here doesn't even know who I am. So Mayor Dinkins, even when I think about it now, it cracks me up. Mayor Dinkins says to Ali, he says, no, he's blind. He has a little vision, which is why you probably didn't notice it, but he's blind. He probably just didn't recognize who you were. And Muhammad Ali, who was known to be a very sensitive person, I mean, as much as he kidded and joked about with the other fighters and that kind of thing, he really never wanted to hurt anybody's feelings. So he comes over to me. And when he comes over to me and I see this big crowd coming behind him, I'm like, oh no. And he comes over to me and he put his arm around me and he said, he was already starting to lose his voice a little bit. He said, would you march with me? And I'm like, what? And he was holding my hand with both of his hands. And I thought, I feel like a prom date. And so we went to the front of the line. I'm standing at the front of the march. Ali is standing on the right. This other guy, Arthur Ashe, yeah, he was standing on the left. And they're taking all these pictures, and Mayor Dinkins is standing on Arthur Ashe's left. And we start marching. And those of you know that those of us in politics are very competitive, right, Keith? You know, we're
absolutely
very competitive.
No question.
And so there were some elected officials who are back in the crowd, and I don't see well, but I hear very well. And they were saying, who the hell does he think he is? He's been here 3 months. I've been here for 17 years. And he's up there marching with Muhammad Ali like he's important, like his name is Dinkins or something. Even Dinkins isn't marching with Ali. So we marched down Adam Clayton Powell Boulevard, and around, I'd say 116th Street, Ali starts to get tired. He still has his arm around me. Now, in those days, I probably weighed about 145 pounds soaking wet. Muhammad Ali probably weighed 270 pounds. And he's leaning on me, and I'm straining. And I guess I've gotten really red trying to hold him up. And so Jim Bell, the great union leader from District 65, comes over and he stops the march, and Basil is with him. And they said, Champ, you want to step out of the race and take a little breather? And Ali says, I have to march. So then they looked at me and they said, Senator Patterson, do you want to get out the race? I'm not going to let Muhammad Ali go. I'll die there before I let go of him. And we keep marching, and I could tell I'm more tired than before. Ali's more tired from before. And I thought to myself, what a dream. I'm battling it out with Muhammad Ali. And the question is, who's going to go first?
Great story, great story. And so many other wonderful stories in this book, Black, Blind, and in Charge. And, you know, to wrap up, I'm just going to throw out, because there's a question here about adversaries. I just wondered if you could comment in a lightning round. I'll just throw out some names and you can say what you like. I'll just throw out the Kennedy, Gillibrand, Clinton, Cuomo, Obama, Bloomberg, Giuliani.
Well, with Caroline Kennedy, I don't think she was really prepared to be the senator, and the amount of pressure. Mayor Bloomberg's deputy mayor writes an op-ed piece on page 2 of the Daily News that if I don't appoint Caroline Kennedy, it's political malpractice. I never even heard of that term. And she pulled out of the race for some reason a couple of days before, and a woman who was working for me who more popularly is now known as the woman that they wrote the series Scandal around. Her name is Judith Smith, and Kerry Washington played the character. She, for some reason, decided to beat up on the Kennedys, and I had to take the hit for it. Bill Clinton was always very nice to me. So was Hillary Clinton. Andrew Cuomo, I'm sure that it didn't bother him to see that I was going through all this trouble. And I'd say something nasty about that, but it didn't really bother me when Spitzer got into trouble. So I'm not going to put the governor down for being any more ambitious than I was. President Obama and I had a fight over the fact that President Obama made all the black congressmen of New York endorse him the day before Hillary got out of the race, which infuriated Hillary and infuriated me. And then when I was told I'd be the master of ceremonies or else, I basically threatened Senator Obama that he hasn't become president yet, and he better hope that he does, because threatening me is not going to work out very well for him. Well, it actually did work out very well for him, because he did become president, and he started this conversation, I shouldn't run for re-election, which I thought was completely out of line. And he also did it to Congressman Rangel, saying he was too old to serve anymore. And I'm sorry, I love President Obama and worked hard for his victory, but his reaction to other African Americans who were peers of his, I thought reminded me of, you know, when you worked with people, then they became the supervisor and the first people they get put on report are their old friends. And I felt that he did that to myself, to Rangel, to the woman from the NAACP, Shirley.
Down in Georgia,
remember.
yeah.
Yes, her. And they kicked her out. She didn't make the statements she was accused of making. They never put her back. And I even heard that President Obama heard that Keith Wright was a great basketball player, and he walked up and gave him a stare down one day and said, "You really think you're that good?" And I'm sorry, you all hadn't played, Keith, because you could have given him an elbow for me.
He sure did. He sure did say that to me.
Thank you, Governor. Thank you.
Thank
What a fabulous, such stories, such history, such, please, folks, Black, blind, and in charge. Thank you so much. I'd like to pass the hosting back to Carl Rodney. I want to thank Basil Wilson, my co-host. I want to thank the governor, but I do want to go to Carl as we ask you to close out the session.
Sure. Thanks, Marcia. Thanks, Basil, and the panelists. A great job. As Honorable Keith Wright said, the idea is to buy the books. Yeah. And I know we've had several inquiry about having the book signed. And what we're urging the participants to do is to buy the book and hang on to it, because post-COVID, we'll find a way to get the governor to sign the book. We've been working with his office, but the logistic of going to Brooklyn wouldn't work out right now. But we want to encourage you, buy the book, and we'll be in touch with you to get signed. And not only buy it, but certainly give it as a gift, because it's a great read. And it is so important that, and we should make a note of it in Black History Month, that when you have history within you and among you, like the three gentlemen we have, Governor Patterson, Honorable Carl McCall, and Honorable Keith Wright, that we need to recognize it, we need to value it, and when it's documented as it's done in this particular case, we need to support it. And we at Carib News will continue to do that, and certainly value the work and the impact that these gentlemen have made. It's important for us to understand that. I don't want to be the last word that you will hear. I'm going to ask the governor to wrap up the session for us in the way that only he can, because it's important that you hear him, and that you and we all can be the better for it as we listen to the governor. Governor, thank you for doing this. Thank you for really agreeing to be with us. Honorable Carl McCall, Again, thank you. And when your book come out, we'll certainly want to be able to work with you and getting it out. And to the members of the editorial staff that we have on, we can assure you we'll have print, we'll have digital, and we'll have social media story coming out of our sessions today, and we'll keep the campaign going. So, Governor.
Thank you, Carl. 28 years ago, I ran for public advocate. There's nothing about it in the book because there was nothing really interesting about that campaign other than I lost. But one of the things that happened in that campaign is I was advocating for the rights of immigrants to be able to vote in our country and replicating the history of immigrants voting in this country in 22 states up until around World War I. And I couldn't get anybody to interview me about it or talk about it, but the Carib News wrote about it, and they made a big deal about it in the breakfast before the West Indian Day Parade in 1993, and it became an issue in the campaign. I can think of similar situations with the Amsterdam News, the City Sun, the magazine that comes out of Harlem begins with a P, and I'm just not thinking of it right now. And so many other outlets that in those days were the only communication we had. Remember, Percy Sutton ran for mayor in 1977 and couldn't get any mainstream exposure about his campaign. And so we had to rely on that. And we're not as reliant on it now, and there are all other types of social media and ways to communicate. But I want to thank all of you who still run these operations for continuing to replicate the news and let people know what's going on. And so to be honored by all of you today, it takes me back to the very beginning of my career and those who helped me get messages out when I couldn't find another venue. So I would just close by just making this one suggestion. In 2020, I had planned to hold a march in Harlem on Memorial Day to celebrate those who invented Memorial Day. And I didn't want it to be a Black march. I wanted the whole city to come to it. And so when the pandemic hit, I thought, oh, that's okay. I'll do it in 2021 because none of the mayoral candidates will not come to this march. So it won't be in 2020. It won't be in 2021. But as soon as we get rid of this horrible virus, I'd like to invite all of you, wherever you came from, whatever color you are, and whatever religion that you observe, to be part of that march, because it's part of American history, not Black history, and it needs to be told the right way. And even though there's a snippy comment in the research that some scholars don't really trust the sources of where this march started, but why did they trust the South, who had rebelled against the country and observed that they started the holiday when they made it a national holiday, the holiday in 1868? The same people they were shooting at said they invented this holiday, and they believed them because they were the same color. So I think if we really want to memorialize those who died to save our country and our freedom, we need to show the ones who really should have been honored and weren't that same respect. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And thanks to Melanie and Carlisa, who was organized this technically. Thank you so much. Thanks, everyone.
Take care.
Take care.
Good.